This is a short bite episode of Homeschool Together. Hello and welcome back to Homeschool Together. We are continuing our short bite today, talking about writing and getting your writers. This is part of Writing Month, and today we are talking about text to speech. Last week we talked about speech to text, kind of getting the creativity onto the page. Here we are going to be talking about getting the creativity off the page and into our ears, kind of going in the opposite direction. We're kind of like a two-lane road here. Both of these ideas can be used in many different ways. We talked about organizing, writing, just getting ideas down last week, writing your articles, freeing up the creative block that might have appeared. Here we're going to be talking about getting the information off the page, whether it is in a written form, we're listening to an article, or we're reading a book, or hearing our writing read back to us so that we can hear for grammar and any type of consistency or flow issues and whatnot. So having our work or having work read to us is a wonderful, wonderful advantage. Now, we all know about the advantages of, say, audiobooks. Things being read to us is a very powerful way for us to consume the written word, not just for entertainment, but also for gathering information and knowledge, but also doing that while being able to do something else. I call this found time. Whether you're mowing the lawn, you're listening to an audiobook, or you're working out and you're listening to an audiobook or podcast, or you're listening to this podcast right now. You're able to do things outside of just sitting there and reading. You're able to enjoy learning something while doing something else. You can also apply that for text to speech, being able to do other work by listening to your book, or listening to an article, or listening to, something that's been assigned to you. Say maybe your student has a class they are taking on the side through one of the, the course classes or whatever, and there's some reading that they have to do, and maybe they're tired for that day, but maybe they want to have it played back to them. That's one great thing you can do, is have text to speech read you something.
Yeah, I do this with my MBA classes. Honestly, we have our textbooks are all digital now because then you can't buy them used. It's a racket.
It is a racket.
But they do have text to speech options in all of my digital textbooks, and I will turn them on my commute and listen to them because I find them so utterly boring if I had to read them normally. But when I'm in the car and I'm forced to listen to them, it's a lot easier way for me to consume them. So I think that it's a great way sometimes to get through something that might be kind of dry.
Yeah, exactly.
And you might lose focus on. You can maybe, do a puzzle or something and listen to that article or whatever. So it can be helpful. Especially
if you're doing something like if you're taking a class on maybe some short stories or whatnot, and you just don't want to read it that day, this would be a great way to do that, right? Or if you're, like what you said, you're reading some stuffy journal or some old article written in the Atlantic or something that you have to then reference for your paper. We can imagine a number of reasons why some of our learners, probably more towards the older, would have to have something read to them, or may want the option to have something read to them. We'll talk about a couple of those ideas. Number one, built into your iOS, so we're talking about your phones and your tablets, is the option of speak screen. And this is an accessibility option for people maybe who do not have the motor skills to be able to operate the tablets, or maybe have vision issues where they can't actually see the tablet and they need it to be spoken to them. They have built in both in Android devices and iOS devices for accessibility options. Many of these features are always hidden for most of us, and most of us do not know about these features until we go into the accessibility options. So we see just this unbelievable amount of work that these developers have done for people who may not have the ability to read the screen or operate the screen. They have built in these just wonderful features for all people to be able to use their devices, and it's really cool. And so we can actually take advantage of that by using the speak to screen for iOS, and I think there's a speech read aloud option in Android as well. That if you have any app open, whether it's like Google Docs or like Kindle, or you have some other type of reader device, maybe an e-reader or something of that nature, you go ahead and just swipe the screen and it will begin to read the screen for you. And if there's a paging option, we were actually playing with this with the Kindle app on my phone, and it would turn the page. Go ahead and keep reading the book, and turn the page, keep reading the book.
I mean, the downside is all of these, of course, every one of these options is like in, not quite a robot voice, but it's a generated voice. This isn't an audiobook reader, right? With all the emphasis and everything. Not yet. Someday that'll be here, I'm sure.
Yeah, put the caveat of not yet.
Yeah, but for the moment, it does sound a little bit mechanical, but it can be really helpful. I like this option for books that don't have an audiobook option, but maybe you want your kids to be able to listen to them.
Or maybe they can't get access to that audiobook in time. Maybe it's checked out at the library and you got to get on hold or something of that nature.
Right. I mean, it's not going to be as great as having an audio reader, but there could be different instances depending on what it is they need to read and what the purpose is. And it could be something textbooky or something that maybe this is a good option. Maybe you've got a learner who really could not focus on a couple pages in a history text, but could really listen to it, even if it's from, a little bit of Siri voice. So, but it's an option. We have a really great article that we found about how to turn it on both iOS and Android that we'll put in the show notes so that you can, go through all the settings and figure out how to do that. It wasn't too complicated on iOS. We don't have an Android that we could play with at the moment. So we just did it on iOS and they said it was a similar set of steps on Android.
It worked really nicely.
But we'll put those instructions up for you.
Now, the other side of this is to get a really good voice reading to you. That's where the effort is. And that's where a lot of these tools will require you to pay to have text read back to you. And why the reason why that is that it's very difficult to have realistic voice text to speech. It's very challenging. It's a very challenging problem. It's actually funny. We had a birthday party, and one of the people from Microsoft was here in that department. And I was actually asking him a lot of questions about this. I go, what is the big, problems? And he goes, oh, it's all inflection and meaning and not being so stilted as you're walking through the sentence, because a lot of times writing has emotion built into a sentence. You're supposed to rise here and fall here, or go low here and rise at the end. It depends on what the author wanted, and that's very hard to imagine and to interpret. And so that's why a lot of these voices are very stilted. And that's both the blending of the words and how the robot actually reads the voice versus more of a natural speaking voice like what we have. Now, what the problem with that is a lot of these tools are being used to generate audio versions of text for like websites or for training videos or for, walkthroughs on software or video screens going, to help people through training or whatever it might be. Those tend to cost a lot of money, but there is a free one available that might be useful. It's called Natural Readers, and I'll put a link down below. And they have an online version and also a software version that can be downloaded to your computer for both Mac and Windows machines. And you just copy and paste the text into the window, and it'll go ahead and read it to you. And you can pick from a couple of voices. You can actually, I think, select the speed at which you want it to read it back to you. Sometimes it might be a little too fast, like I speak a little too fast and I get kind of marble mouth. You can actually slow it down. Some other readers, you may want to have it sped up. Like, for example, when I listen to my podcasts, I listen at 1 1/4 speed. And that's kind of normal. For my audiobooks, I'm at like 1.5 speed. So I'm used to going faster so I can get the content quicker. For some, for mostly for kids, younger kids, you're probably going to want to slow it down a little bit so they can hear the text a lot clearer and they can understand. That is really, really helpful. Now, that is for getting something that has been written, read back to you. Now, another option too is, when you have a little bit more of an advanced reader, having what they have written read back to them is an incredible editing tool. And I would highly, 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 highly recommend adding the reading back my written work as part of the editing flow for every single young writer, no matter what age they are. I mean, maybe the younger ages we can kind of push out, but once you have a student who's starting to write and they need to produce grammatically correct writing, good spelling, good flow, good pacing. We're talking like end of elementary, middle school, high school level. Adding in the text to speech option as part of their editing workflow will do them wonders. They have everybody who, reads a lot or listens or watches videos has just an innate understanding of what is good writing. We just hear it. Like we can actually hear it.
Yeah.
And
You can hear when it sounds wrong.
yeah, you're like, oh, that sounds weird. That sounds stilted. That sounds awkward. Or that word is wrong. That phraseology that I put in there is wrong. Or I should put a comma here because it just runs together for way too long. And we'll talk about, I think, in the next short bite or in the next episode, coming episode, about tools for editing, physically editing your tools, like, spelling mistakes and things of that nature. But just having your work read back to you will fix 80 or 90% of flow, phrases, spelling errors. Does it even sound coherent?
Right. And if using a tool like this is not what you want to do, you could always, you can go old school. I've done this since I started writing papers. I always read them aloud to myself.
That's another
and
option.
I can hear when something sounds awkward. I read through it as if I were giving it as a speech. And you can hear like, oh, darn it, that doesn't sound good, right? You notice it.
And the funny thing is, a lot of my author friends did that. They would print it out and they would read it aloud and they would inline edit with pen. So instead of getting on the computer, because when you're editing on a screen in front of a keyboard and you're just reading it quietly in your head, you're going to miss half of the errors.
Yeah, you have to read it out loud. You can't just read it in your head. You got to read it out loud.
But even reading it out loud in front of a keyboard, you're going to miss a bunch. And what I used to see was people used to print it out, read it aloud, and actually hand mark it if there's an error, because you're more focused on the movement of the words and you're listening, and you can actually focus. What happens, I think, on the computer is you get a little distracted when you got the keyboard in front of you. So if you have your young writer print off their work and read it aloud, that's perfect. Another way to do it too is have the computer read it back to them while they sit there and they edit with the printed off material, or they sit there and watch as the computer reads to them. Very often
that's what you do, right?
That is what I do. So I use Microsoft Word, and I use the read aloud option under the review tab. So on the top, there's a bar that says review. And wherever the cursor is located, you click read aloud, and it immediately goes into this mode where it starts reading to you. So I typically have my headphones on, and I will just hit read aloud, and I'll just sit there and I'll watch it. And they have this nice little button on the side that says you can pause. So if there's an error, I can immediately fix it, or I could sit there and go, wow, that sentence did not sound good. I'm going to sit there and watch it. I'm going to read it. I can move the cursor back, have it read it to me again. Go, oh yeah, this is awkward. I'm going to rewrite this whole sentence. And then when I rewrite the whole sentence, I move the cursor ahead, back a little further, and I listen to it again with my new writing, implanted into that paragraph or whatever that line is. This is an incredibly powerful tool. I started doing this about 3 years ago, and it has really helped my editing, helps the clarity of my writing. I wish I would have done this a long time ago. And that's why I tell every young writer that I see, every young person that I see, like, you got to use the Microsoft Word read aloud option, because it is so powerful. It really helps clean up your writing, helps make it concise. You can hear when things get really wordy. As you can tell, when I talk, I can get a little wordy and I can kind of ramble on. My writing can be a little bit like that as well. And so when I hear it, I go, oh, I need to be more Hemingway and less Dostoevsky, right? Or whatever it is, like less wordy, more concise. And it really helps just draw on your writing. It makes it a lot cleaner, and it makes for a better reading experience for whoever's going to read it, whatever, like whether it's it could be just your parents, or it could be a writing competition, or it could be the teacher at your co-op who's getting your paper, whatever it might be.
Or college entrance essay
And everything. That has been a really, really powerful tool. And I know a lot of my writer friends have transitioned over to that. So they'll sit there with the headphones on and they'll have their entire novel read back to them. And it will take like a week or so to get through it all, because you're going fairly slow, because you want to make, it's a long book, 300 or 400 pages, right? So it's going to take a while to have it read to you. It's incredibly powerful. So if you just have a 2-page essay that you're writing, it is going to take you 10 minutes to listen to that read to you. So it's super powerful. It's an unbelievably powerful option. I believe Mac also has it. It's under accessibility, and it's called Voice. And I think it has the exact same features, and it will begin to read back to you. So if you're a Google Docs writer, this is where it kind of gets you. They do not have a very good option. their accessibility feature is very distracting, and it is not as simplified as, say, Microsoft Word. So very often, and I'm a big advocate of Google Docs as an option, they do not have a good writing tool. A text-to-speech tool. It's very difficult to use, very ham-handed in the way you have to install it. You have to put a plugin in, and then when it's turned on, everything you touch gets read to you, and it can be very distracting as a writer. I just want the simplified, experience in like Microsoft Word or Mac Pages. So I would really highly recommend either using those two tools. Even if you are a Google Docs reader, try to maybe see if you can get a version of Word, or use the Natural Readers tool that we mentioned earlier, where you're copying and pasting your document into there, and then have that read back to you. And then you can do the editing in line there. I wish Google Docs would have a better option there, because for me, my writing, I write in Google Docs mostly, and I wish I could finish in Google Docs, but I can't because of this one issue. And because of this, I have to copy all my work into Microsoft Word so I can finish in Microsoft Word, because they have such a great voice reading option. It's so important that I actually spend 2 days copying an entire novel over into Microsoft Word, because it's such a great feature. And so I know that if you have a young writer who's learning to write, needs to edit, needs to, do a couple passes on their work before they can actually turn it in or finish it, have them use the read back option on whatever tool they're using. And I'll put a couple links into the show notes. Text to speech is such an important editing tool and feature for any young writer. You can't live without it.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time,
happy homeschooling!